I think so. Ms. Davis?
Oops.
I'm ready.
Okay, yeah, so I need the, it says stop my video. Do I want to do that?
No.
Okay. Okay, here we are. Cleveland Board of Building Standards and Building Appeals Preamble. In compliance with notification requirements of Ohio's open meeting law under COVID-19 emergency declaration, notice of this meeting has been publicly posted. All boards and commissions under the purview of the City Planning Department conducts its meetings according to Robert's Rules of Order. Actions during the meeting will be taken by voice vote. Abstentions from any vote due to a conflict of interest should be stated for the record prior to the taking of any vote. In order to ensure that everyone participating in the meeting had the opportunity to be heard, we ask that you use the raise hand feature before asking a question or making a comment. The raised hand feature can be found in the participants panel on the desktop and mobile version and activated by clicking the hand icon. Please wait for the chair or facilitator to recognize you and be sure to select unmute and announce yourself before you speak. When finished speaking, please lower your hand by clicking on the raise hand icon and mute your microphone. We will also be utilizing the chat feature to communicate with participants. The chat feature can be activated by clicking the chat button located on the bottom of the WebEx screen. A condition of today's meeting is that there are only 3 members of the Board of Building Standards, which is a quorum. If all 3 members agree, then the resolution being discussed and passed or denied will be done so. If one of the board members disagrees, then that is denying the appeal under the rule that we don't have a quorum voting to accept it. We will reschedule you in that under that condition.
Mr. Dake, we have Ms. Afton with her hand raised.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Patricia T. Aston on behalf of the City of Cleveland Law Department for Building and Housing and Fire. One will object to the last statement, as I usually do, when you mentioned that they'll hear the docket and then 2-to-1 ruling and then reschedule. The board will have heard on that, but I know you're going to say so be it. But also, as I have been, we object to the chat function, as I've been objecting to each time, and I'd like to ask that we independent verification that this is live streaming as required under open meeting. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. We will note your objection. First docket, A520.
Mr. Chairman, before you do that, can Maurice do a standard verification for open meetings rules by the Ohio Attorney General ruling? Thank you.
Yes, we are currently live streaming on YouTube.
I want to do roll call.
Oh, yes, roll call. Okay, the meeting of Wednesday, September 30th, 2020 for the Board of Building Standards and Building Appeals is now in session. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bradley,
Whoops. I will make a phone call.
Yeah, I think he was on. He just has to unmute.
here. He's muted.
Yeah.
Let me unmute him. There you go. Mr. Bradley, we can hear you now.
You can hear me? Brad?
Mr. Bradley's noting his presence.
Mr.
You can hear me?
There's an interference in Bradley's.
He's signed on 2 different places. That's why. Okay, I took care of it.
All right, Mr. Bradley has indicated his presence.
Mr. Dank
Yes.
and Mr. Gallagher.
Sure.
Okay, first docket, A520, 3146 Scranton Road.
Application and fees are in order. Notice of violation is hazardous conditions. Issued on December 9, 2019. Appeal statement was received January 9, 2020. Asking for 2 years to abate the violations. Present for the hearing. If you are here for this docket, please make your announcement now.
Hello, my name is Eric Lutzo, and I am here for the meeting.
Eric Lutzo here for the meeting. And this is a solemnly, who's here is Mr. Vanover here. Who's here for
Also
the?
have
Yes, I'm here, Mr.
Building
Chairman.
and Housing.
Tom
Hi.
Vanover from Building and Housing and Patricia
Vanover's
Ashton
here.
Law.
Solemnly swear or affirm the comments you are about to make are the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Okay. May we hear from Mr. Lutzo? You request, Mr. Lutzo, you've requested 2 years, and we don't grant 2 years. It's just
Okay.
too long to think that we'd be watching the situation unfold. What is the hazardous condition, and why are you asking for that kind of time?
I believe the hazardous condition is the bent steeple on the top of the church, pictured in the image below. The reason we've asked for 2 years is because we were doing the due diligence to do the historic restoration. In that time, the project, and Ms. Davis, I did send some supporting documents. Does the committee have those documents that I sent over yesterday?
Well, what are the supporting documents going to tell?
The supporting documents are in what, most importantly, CHN Housing Partners is in partnership with me. They have site control of the property. We've been awarded $9.4 million in LIHTC funding for this project. The city is a partner with us. We're moving forward very quickly. We're applying for historic tax credits today. So this project is very exciting. I also have a letter from Tremont West because they've been intimately involved in the project. Corey sent a letter over as well. We're very excited about the restoration, the saving of the building, and the restoration of the structure. And I think we're working very quickly considering the times that we're in and the obstacles that we have before us. So those are the supporting documents that we have.
Do you have you had a licensed an architect or?
Yeah. Yes, sir. Sorry to cut off, but from my architect, a letter was sent over on January 8th, 2020. It basically states that the architect, along with the structural engineer, I'm trying to get the right inspection. They were accompanied by a project manager from American International Construction. We're able to gain access to the interior of the steeple to examine the status of the structural integrity of its components used for the framing and the support of the steeple. It is granted that the steeple does list slightly. However, our observation was that the structure appears to be stable. It is the intention of the owner to remove the steeple inspired to restore the assembly of its original condition. Upon completion of the restoration process, the steeple will be reset in place, and that is the condition or the situation right now. We're working on we've been through the historical committees have been through it. It's part of a process where to get the funding, they want to see those elements restored. So again, we're very excited that we're going to see some beautiful new life in this building.
Okay.
Excuse me, Mr. Dank.
Vanover, at this point, it would seem that they would need a permit with drawings approved to proceed with even the restoration of the steeple. Is that correct? Or have you received anything from them regarding the construction?
Mr. Chairman, no, we have not. As Mr. Lutzo has explained, they're in the process of due diligence and getting a project together. I will ask, Mr. Chairman, to the appellant, have you done a facade assessment and inspection on this building under the City of Cleveland facade and registration ordinance?
Mr. Lutzo?
That assessment is being done right now through the through our partnership with CHN.
Okay, so Mr. Chair, just so that I'm clear, this building, this structure is considered a substantial structure under the City of Cleveland codified ordinances for facade inspection. So with or without the project, there's an expectation that a full facade inspection be done and it be registered with the city to determine the condition that it's in. I don't disagree with, I mean, there is a process. You're talking about the State Historic Preservation Office. You're talking about tax credits. The architect said it's listing slightly, but it's stable. So I'm a little confused. If the architect's saying that there's no hazard, then that's a different story than if the account is that there is a hazard and you're just going to you're just waiting to fix it. The reality is, with my experience with the Historic Preservation Office and all of the bodies involved, there's nothing that prevents them from removing the steeple and storing it.
No,
The
Mr.
fear
Chairman,
is that it's going to fall.
Mr. Chairman, this is Patricia McGinty Aston with the City of Cleveland. I asked the board to carefully look at the architect's letter, which I will point out legally is unstamped. Therefore, under the OBC, has certain, the lack of the stamp has certain implications. I can defer to Mr. Vanover on that. It does not, I will ask to look carefully. It does not say it's stable, and it is not stamped to make statements that it's stable. It says it appears to be stable. So it lacks the stamping of an architect or an engineer. Therefore, the city is going to ask that you uphold this as a hazardous condition based upon the testimony of Mr. Vanover. This was issued almost a year ago. We're just 2 months shy of this being a year. That this has been sitting like this in the neighborhood, and I think it is important. If I can just very briefly finish, sir, and then you'll be done. I'll be done. I think the language of this architect's letter and the lack of the stamp is very important code-wise. Thank you.
As a registered engineer, I would question that an architect can stamp a structural condition as to whether it's hazardous or not, and that's why the letter isn't stamped. I don't think an architect can stamp a.
I agree with you. Well, Mr. Chairman, you have the code requirement, but they did not provide, unless it's part of the supplemental information, they did not provide a engineer stamp to that effect either, which is important.
Well, they use the word appears also, and you can't use the word appears when you're talking about a structural hazard, a structural condition. It has to be certified, or what the engineer has to render a professional judgment, and that hasn't been done. I think Mr. Vanover's suggestion was excellent. Mr. Vanover, if they remove and store the steeple, and we're talking about the Robin's Egg Blue, just the top steeple with the cross on it, is that correct, Mr. Vanover?
I believe at this point that's what's being cited. I think that there are other conditions that need to be addressed, but we don't know that because there's been no facade inspection provided. But I believe it's my understanding, not that I believe, it's my understanding that the hazardous condition is the steeple, the cupola on top of the steeple alone.
Yes.
But they would. There's no permits required for them to remove it. It's a hazardous condition, and they can remove it and store it without permits from our office.
The request is for 2 years to proceed, but it would seem that we have to remove the hazardous condition, which is the top of the steeple, and then proceed with the paperwork required and the inspection required to grant any kind of a permit for any kind of construction. Is that correct, Mr. Vanover?
Well, Mr. Chairman, they're actually separate issues. 2 years is, I mean, as I've stated, abating the hazard does not take 2 years. It can take, a couple hours.
Well,
they-
that's what I was leading up to, is that we can give them some time to remove the hazardous condition. But it can't proceed beyond that, that is not to be construed as permission to continue. Because you've indicated that you have to have a facade inspection as well. Mr. Lutzel, do you have anything to ask or anything to add at this time? Because we're going to give you a little time, board members, we should give them some time to remove the hazardous condition presented and then remand it to the city. Is that
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Gallagher has his hand raised.
Mr. Gallagher?
Yes, I think that I mean, one of two things. If it's a hazardous condition, it needs to be dealt with right away. And number two, either that or an engineer stating that it is secure and that it's not going anywhere, and I guess stamped whatever needs to be done from an engineer stating that it is safe. Okay, not it appears, but that it is safe. So one of two things has to occur. Plus, I think the facade inspection also needs to be done. I mean, we can give time on that, whatever needs to go, and then remand it back to the city to take care of whatever else has to be done.
Mr. Lutz, so you don't have any familiarity with the facade inspection, so we don't know how long that, Mr. Vandiver, how long should a facade inspection on a church of time take? Can you do it in a week, 2 weeks?
Well, Mr. Chairman, it could take, I mean, it could take a week, it could take longer. Not being familiar with all of the facades of this building. I will object to granting more time for the facade inspection because as it stands, it's already 2.5 years past due, depending on the age of the structure. And that matter is not before the board. There's no violation notice issued as of yet for failing to get a facade inspection. What's before the board is the hazardous condition and a request for time to abate that. So I would object to any ruling granting time for a facade inspection that's already 2 years past due.
Okay, and your point is you haven't cited them for that.
It's not before this board. It's only
Okay.
point of information to the appellate that it's required from myself, as well as that it prohibits us the ability to opine on the balance of the structure because it's their responsibility to get that inspection. So we're talking about the hazardous condition that is the steeple.
Board members, December 1st for removal of the hazardous condition is December 1st good? Mr. Gallagher?
Yes, I'm fine with that. I think the sooner they get on it, the better, and then the rest can be remanded. But I think that definitely has to be addressed either by an engineer stating that it is stable and safe, or that it be removed.
Okay, we'll give them till December 1st to do that.
So to be clear, do I have, per Mr. Gallagher's comment, it's either removal or have the engineer look at it and provide a statement saying that it's stable? Is that correct?
Yes, but we're making a judgment on the structural integrity because I don't think you can look at it and know that it's stable. I think you're going to wind up.
I respect that comment, and I just want to be sure that I'm clear about the next steps.
Okay.
The city of Cleveland is a partner on this project. It's been awarded, like I said, $9.4 million in May. CHN is a partner. There's historic tax.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
To make sure we're okay.
We will, okay, then we'll make the motion.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Vanover has a question.
So,
Mr.
Mr. Chairman, just for a point of process, the appeal requests 2 years, and then they provided a document stating basically the architect's letter. The architect's letter objects to the violation notice, saying that it is not a hazardous condition. The board can either accept the architect's letter and rule that if there is not a hazardous condition, or they can reject the architect's letter as not enough information because it's an architect and because it's not sealed. If the board is expecting to receive further information from a structural engineer, that information would then, they would need to, that would be basically objecting again to the violation notice stating that it's not a hazardous condition. And the board would need to rule on that. So if the expectation is to allow for them to provide a sealed engineer's report stating that it is not a hazardous condition, then the board would need to rule on that. Therefore, you should hold this open until such time. Give them the 2 weeks until you, to give them 2 weeks to change their position or the
Okay.
position of the board.
I was suggesting until December 1st.
Well, so Mr. Chairman, that means you're leaving the docket open until December 1st. They can't send, they have to, the board has to rule on whether or not there's a hazardous condition or not.
Mr. Dank, there is a hazardous condition, and I think we need to reject that letter. I think we need to give them 2 weeks and have them come back, and just as Mr. Vanover is suggesting.
So I would ask that you uphold the violation notice as properly issued. If you wish to grant them time to abate the nuisance, then do so. I think 2 months is more than, I mean, it's dangerous. And by December 1st, we don't know what the weather's going to do. There's it's already a hazardous condition. But if you want to give them more time, you can. We ask that you uphold the notice as properly issued. If you choose to grant them time, grant them time. If they provide something before the resolution is adopted in 2 weeks, stating that it's not a hazardous condition, then the board can rule at that time.
Okay, a motion to find that the violation notice was properly issued based upon photographic evidence and to reject the architect's opinion that the hazardous condition appears not to exist, and to grant appellant until December 1st, 2020, to present to the city of Cleveland and the board a stamped letter indicating from a registered structural engineer that the hazardous condition does not exist, with the reasons for his observation, or remove the steeple, the top of the steeple, the robin's egg blue portion of the steeple, to abate that hazardous condition. Motion so in order.
So moved.
Motion, Mr. Gallagher. Second by Mr. Dank. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bradley,
Okay.
or can you unmute him, please?
Hear me?
Okay.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Hey, Mr. Bradley. Vote
Yeah.
yes.
Mr. Dank,
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Next docket is A 1420, 1552 Ansel Road.
Application and fees are in order. Notice of violation is condemnation of the main structure. Issued January 14th, 2020. I'm sorry, issued December 17th, 2019. Appeal statement received January 14th, 2020. Asking for 180 days to abate the violation. Present for the hearing, Tom Vanover, Building and Housing. Patricia Ashton, Law. We have Mr. Brown. Is your attorney here as well, Mr. Brown? I thought I saw him logged in earlier.
I believe Mr. Navarre should be on the line, but I can't tell if he could indicate whether he is or not. That'd be helpful.
Yeah, he was here earlier. I don't see him on my list anymore. Okay,
Who is present for
swearing in
the,
witnesses.
Good morning. My name is
Mr.
Louis
Brown
Brown.
is. Mr. Brown, you have your microphone working? Brown, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Oh, yes, yes.
Okay, good.
And Mr. Hanover is also present for the hearing. Solemnly swear or affirm the comments you're about to make are the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God. Okay. The condemnation of the structure, you're requesting 180 days, 6 months for abatement of that condition. Give us your story, please. Is that still
Sure.
accurate?
It is, and thank you for the opportunity to be heard this morning. I know that these violations have gone back a ways due to COVID. Obviously, there were some delays in addressing you, the board. The history of this property is that we own, if you're facing 1552, we own the property directly to the left, Regency Square Apartments, which is an operating, fully occupied property. This property has, since our ownership of Regency, which is probably 8 years now, been vacant and abandoned. The 1552 property, and I can see from the pictures you're flipping both from 1552 and 1568, which is to the left of Regency. Both of those properties were vacant and abandoned. We made the decision to buy 1552 first. It was owned by an absentee owner out of California that had bought a bundle of non-performing loans throughout the country, and 1552 was one of those loans. So the actual owner of this property that we purchased it from had never actually even been to Cleveland and seen this property. We bought 1552 with the intent, which is still our intent, to redevelop the property, and with the property comes a vacant parcel to the right of it and a sliver parcel owned by the city to the right of the vacant parcel, and to raise 1552 and do a new construction project. I have been in conversations with the city's development department, planning and zoning department, the building department, as well as the community development office for quite some time. In fact, I spoke with Mike McBride this morning, and previously, about 2 weeks ago, spoke with Director Donald in the building department, and prior to that had met with, in February, prior to COVID, had been in the city hall and met with Mike McBride, Ms. Scott, and others to discuss our plans for both 1552 as well as the 1568 parcel, which include the demolition of those structures. We are in those conversations. We, similar to the last hearing, are putting together our financing plan, which requires a number of different financing sources. We believe the city will ultimately be a partner in that financing plan, similar to the way that they've been a partner in Regency Square for us. We are also the selected developer for the Longfellow School, which is the adaptive historic reuse of a historic school building as well as new construction. So I think we have a long and positive history of doing good development work in different parts of the city, and that's our intent here. And so we would ask that you provide us with a little bit more time to effectuate those plans. I will say, I spoke this morning with and regularly speak with our director of physical plant, who reported to me that we are continually making this building safe. And the first things we did on both buildings, once we bought 1568 out of tax lien foreclosure because the owner was not paying its tax obligations to the city. We boarded the buildings up to make them safe from squatters. And that is something that we can do on a regular basis. We also have a regular pest control contract for these properties to make sure that there are no pest issues. So the photos that you're showing do show a building in disrepair. That's the way that those buildings have been since prior to our ownership. We have made them safe in terms of boarding them up. And our plan ultimately is to raise the structures and develop new housing on Ample Road. So that's the history. Again, I appreciate your consideration this morning and look forward to your feedback.
Mr. Denk, we have Ms. Aston and Mr. Gallagher.
Let's get Mr. Gallagher first and then Ms. Aston.
Okay, I think that because the thought here is to raise the property, to demolish the property anyways, I think that it probably would be best, and we're just talking right now on 1552 because we haven't opened up the other one, but that we should probably just remand it because there's a lot of different players that are going to be involved in this, and a timeline would be a little difficult. And if you're working with the city, I think it would just be a better process doing it that way.
Okay, I agree with that. Mr. Brown, did you say that you were going to demolish all the properties that are involved? In other words, 1568 as well as 1552?
That is the plan, yes.
Okay, so far so good. Ms. Aston?
Well, Mr. Chairman, since that was his clarification and Mr. Gallagher addressed the issue of 1568, which was what I raised my hand originally, I will defer to Mr. Vanover on the rest. So Mr. Gallagher clarified you guys were not hearing the dockets. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Vanover.
what is the date? He's asking for more time. We don't object to more time. Typically, I would, these are monster structures. All right, they're very huge. They are condemned, properly condemned. So we would definitely ask that the notice of violation be upheld. And typically, I would, of course, request that they be remanded back to the Department of Building and Housing. But I didn't hear a date. So originally it was 180 days. Is that still 180 days?
Mr. Denk, we have Ms. Davis.
Ms. Davis.
Mr. Chairman, I have the appellant's lawyer reaching me via email. His associate is on the line. He's on by phone, but he's muted. We can't figure out which number it is. So Maurice, could you unmute all of the phone lines? I think he wants to give testimony on behalf of his client.
There we go. They're unmuted. Somebody.
So Mr. Dennis Never, are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
Somebody's interfering.
Mr. Bradley has to turn his computer down. If you're on the phone and the computer, turn your computer all the way down and it'll stop echoing.
There you go.
Yeah, he just muted himself. Or I think he just dropped off.
Mr. Brown. Brown on?
Yes, I am, sir.
What time do you think you're going to know what the next step is and when it will occur? And the next step is what? To get enough money to demo?
That's correct. We've been in conversations with the city. I've spoken, as I mentioned, with Director Donald. We have proposed a couple different options for raising the buildings and accessing demo funds from the city. And so I would ask that the original request of 180-day relief or continuance be upheld today so that we have 180 days from today to realize and effectuate those plans.
Mr. Van, effectively sealed up, that can they maintain these buildings to your standards for 180 days easily or not so easily? Do you have a comment on that?
So, Mr. Chairman, my understanding is that they are currently secured, and we would ask that they continue to do that. I think they can. We don't object to the 180 days.
Okay.
And just to respond quickly, as I mentioned, we own the property in the middle of both of these. We have a full-time maintenance person as well as a roving maintenance person, and we continually make sure that these are secure and will do so. It's in our best interest to do so, and we will continue to do so.
Okay. A motion is ordered to grant the appellant until May 1st, 2021 to abate the violations. The properties are to be maintained as they are now in secured condition acceptable to the Division of the Department of Building and Housing. Motion so in order.
So moved.
Motion, Mr. Gallagher. Second by Mr. Dank. Call the roll.
Mr. Bradley, Mr. Dank,
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher.
Yes. And Mr. Dank, I would open up that other property right away and do the same thing.
Hey, excuse me one second, Mr. Gallagher. Do you concur on the 180 days? Okay. I've got Mr. Bradley has concurred. Okay, I'm
Mr. Dave,
sorry.
can you put him on speakerphone? This is Patty. Can you put him on speakerphone so everyone else can hear him too?
Go ahead, sir. We should hear you now. Mr. Bradley?
Hear you, would you, he's on, you're on now.
I didn't hear you.
Mr. Bradley, what would you like Mr. Bradley to say?
I'm
You
on.
hear me, Howard?
I hear you.
Just say yes.
Yes.
All right, he concurs.
That works. Thank you.
Okay, that was it. All right, stay with us. Okay, Mr. Gallagher, you were saying something?
Go ahead.
Mr.
We
Gallagher?
talked about, everything's good. I would move on with the next property and do exactly the same thing.
Okay, next property is docket A 15-2015-68 Ames Road.
Application and fees are in order. Notice of violation is a condemnation of the main structure issued January 6, 2020. Appeal statement received January 14, 2020, requesting 180 days to abate the violation. Present for the hearing, Tom Vanover, Building and Housing, Patricia Ashton Law, Mr. Brown, owner.
Appellant. Okay, solemnly swear or affirm the comments you're about to make are the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth.
I do.
Okay, Mr. Brown, would you concur with the same action on this property and the same dates?
Yes, that would work for us.
Okay, a motion is ordered.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Van.
I would, just a couple of interjections, if we could go back through. The garage needs to be secured as well. Because right now it's just open space for the harboring of whatever. The weather's going to turn, it's going to get cold within that 180 days. So there's an expectation that, if Maurice, if you could flip through the pictures, or Carmela, whoever controls that. One more maybe. Yeah, so this garage needs to be boarded up as well.
What
so
is
that it
that you
doesn't
want
become an
boarded up?
encampment for vagrants and become dangerous. I would also like the buildings, if they've got please do not cut grass spray painted on the boards to remove that. If you cut the grass and keep it maintained yourself, the city will not cut the grass. You don't have to put a sign up that says don't cut the grass. They won't cut it if it's already cut. If it's not already cut, then they'll still cut it. So the spray painted sign that says please do not cut the grass doesn't do anything other than remind the neighbors that the property is vacant and abandoned. So I would ask that that spray paint be covered up and that this garage be boarded immediately.
Oh, the garages is what you said needed the boarding up. Okay. A motion is in order to give the appellant until December 1st, 2020 to board the garage to preclude vandalism and occupancy, to maintain the boarding in other areas as it is now, to remove the grass cutting sign. The property is granted until May 1st, 2021 to abate the violations. The property is remanded at this time to the Division Building House for supervision and further action. Motion so in order.
So moved.
Motion, Mr. Gallagher. Second by Mr. Dank. Mr. Bradley.
Call the roll.
Mr. Bradley,
I've got to get him.
Mr. Dank, Mr. Gallagher.
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to get Mr. Bradley before we're all.
Are we waiting on Mr. Bradley?
Yes, we are.
Mr. Bradley, go ahead and cast your vote.
Yes.
Got it. All right, you've assented to the resolution as presented, correct, Mr. Bradley?
Yes.
Next docket.
Thank you for your time this morning.
Howard?
Mr. Dank,
Yes.
Next docket.
we can move on to A49.
Oh, okay. Next docket, A4920, 9900 Henderson Avenue.
Application and fees are in order. Notice of violation is illegal use, change of occupancy. Issued January 16, 2020. Appellant is requesting for time. Present for the hearing, Tom Vanover, Building and Housing. Patricia Ashton, Law. Would the witnesses for A4920 please state your name for the record?
And we have Miss Aston with her hand raised as well.
Ms. Aston?
Thank you, Mr.
Recognize
Chairman.
Ms. Aston, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Patricia McGinty Aston for the City of Cleveland Law Department. If you can proceed with Ms. Davis's having them recognized first and swear them in, and then I will just do my preliminary since there was an objection on the violation notice. Thank you.
Fine.
We have Cynthia. I believe she's one of the appellants. Raised her hand.
Thank you very much. Ms. Omiyukuda.
Well, I want to recognize all the people that plan to speak and swear them in. So are there others?
That'd be me, Mark Stockman.
Hello, this is
Anything
Tom Heron.
else?
We have Daryl Mapson with his hand raised, Mark Stockman,
Yes.
and Tom Aaron.
Oh. Tom Heron was the last one, Rick. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, solemnly, is that it? Is that everyone?
We have Patrick Haggerty as well.
Patrick Hannity, okay. Solemnly, comments you're about to make are the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Two.
Do speak, or will they introduce themselves and speak once we introduce the docket? Is that the plan at this time?
Yes.
So,
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, Patricia McGinty, Aston City, Cleveland Law Department. As you heard this case this property, not this case, I apologize, this property previously under the fire violation notice, it would have a 3-something-19 docket, a 387-19 docket. Then you previously heard this was all prior to COVID pandemic. And in this case is similar to the appeal statement in the previous matter. And I have had an opportunity to speak with Mr. Stockman about this, but they did object to this violation notice, which puts the onus and the first administrative burden on the city to prove that the violation notice was issued correctly. I would request to incorporate all that prior testimony, but in this case, it is a building code change of use code section. You will note, Mr. Chairman, and I do have Mr. Vanover to address that. I believe the city also had Mr. Lightcap. I'm sorry, he's not a Mr. technically, Battalion Chief Lightcap, who didn't plan to give testimony, is available for any fire questions that may have come up. And if he wasn't sworn in, I anticipate he would swear in. If he only needs to answer any questions that may come up. But the city is prepared to demonstrate that it did cite this properly as a change of use because it was an assembly, and I will defer to Mr. Vanover on the technical OBC. But basically, it was and always had been an assembly church use that added the homeless shelter use, which is an R use of some type. I can't recall which residential, as a temporary homeless shelter. So based upon the testimony this board will hear, we are going to ask you to uphold the notice as properly issued at the conclusion of this matter. I will defer to Mr. Vanover on any time frame. I know that there's been discussions with the architect regarding, I believe it's Mr. Mapson was here at the in front of the board at the previous hearing. Any time frame or what might need to occur regarding that. I think there's some other change of circumstances that the appellant might be sharing with this board. But as it relates to the code requirements, the code does require an application plan submittal because it is a change in use occupancy, adding the use that requires a new certificate of occupancy as required under the OBC as well as the city's codes. They also did preserve any Constitution and First Amendment and other federal issues in their appeal. The board does not have the authority for constitutional issues to be heard. And then previously we talked about before this board the RLUIPA claims, although they make their RLUIPA arguments. That's the Religious Land Use and Institutional Persons Act under federal law. These are safety codes for the safety of the persons in the building, in the structure, as well as any responding personnel who might have to come. And the city's position remains as it was in the previous appeal that these RLUIPA code sections do not preempt or stop the city from these safety code requirements. Other than that, I will defer to Mr. Vanover, but again, we are going to ask that you uphold the notices properly issued. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And the violation notice is an unauthorized illegal use. Has it already gone from assembly to homeless shelter, or to what I guess would be non-transient or transient occupancy?
I believe the appellant will be telling this board what has been happening since the
All right.
last hearing.
Well, okay, we hear from, who is Mr. Stockman, the spokesman, or?
Yes, I can give just a quick introduction as to where we are.
Thank you.
Sure. As you recall, I mean, the church was allowing people to seek overnight shelter within their facility during the winter months. Because of complaints from the neighbors about the homeless, this led to inspections, which led to 2 citations from the city, one from the fire department, one from building and housing. The fire department, one of the a similar citation from both fire department and building and housing was a claim that by allowing these people to seek winter shelter, it was converting it a R1 certificate of occupancy was required. The fire hearing was back in February, I believe. That was continued. This is, I believe, is the new building and housing hearing. Since February, the weather has warmed up. A number of things have happened. We now have the COVID pandemic, and the church's partnership with Metanoia, who was a housing advocacy group that was also coordinating the shelter facility, they've split ways. So their future is really now to a much smaller scale. Given the COVID, they are looking at they could probably only provide temporary shelter for up to 18 people and 2 staff members within the facility at the time. Since February, they've hired an architect, Daryl Mapson. He's analyzed the building code for building compliance and also analyzed what type of safety improvements can be done to the property. So I think really Mr. Mapson's presentation today to see and the pastor as to what the current status is and the plans are.
And he will state their requested, and you know what they're requesting as relief or variance from the code from the Board of Building Standards. Is that correct? Or
They're requesting to continue the use as previously used in the wintertime. It's currently not being used for any, no one's spending any shelter time there now because of the weather.
So Mr. Mapson is with you. He's going to speak now. Is that what's going to happen?
Yes.
Fine.
Unless, Pastor, is there anything you want to add first before Mr. Mapson gives his presentation?
Have these people all been sworn in?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, we have Cynthia with her hand raised.
Thank you
Yes.
so much.
Cynthia?
So much. And I just wanted to briefly acknowledge my appreciation for your time and consideration. And we're really trying to move forward in a collaborative manner and to meet all the health and safety concerns that the city may have. Very grateful for Mr. Mapson's assistance with that, as well as the legal team. And then parenthetically, I just wanted to mention that we did have a visit from Building and Housing just to verify that the building is not currently in use as a transient facility of any sort. There are no cots out. As a matter of fact, the reason that he did not take photos was because we're in a arrangement with the local ancillary program held at the elementary school, and they're using the multipurpose room now 4 days a week from 8 to 4. And so we had children in there, and we offered asking them to move or to turn their heads so they wouldn't be identifiable. But he was reluctant to interfere with their day. So, but I believe that his report should probably be on the record someplace. I just wanted to make that comment that we do consider ourselves a multi-purpose ministry. And right now that space where the folks were sleeping is being used as a kind of a tutoring and school program. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Mapson? May we hear from the spokesman for the group, Mr. Mattson, I believe his name is?
Daryl Mapson. Mr. Mapson, well, here, let me unmute you. There you go.
Okay. All right. I appreciate your time. We have met with Mr. Vanover and the fire department, and I've done a code research on the building. And per the city's request to turn a portion of the building into an R1 residential congregate living area, there are three main requirements in the code for that. The first one being a fire separation from the congregate living area and the rest of the building, which is already in existence. A fire alarm system, which we are going to install, and also a fire sprinkler system, which we are proposing a limited area fire sprinkler system. And we feel with those three components that we comply with everything concerning an R1 residential living space. So the church has engaged a fire alarm company and also a fire sprinkler company, American Fire, and they will be presenting drawings to the Building and Housing Department for review and future installation. And we feel with the compliance with the R1 requirements that it should be sufficient to maintain the A3 existing occupancy currently for the entire building. But we'll leave that up to the Building and Housing Department upon review of our drawings, which should be submitted in the next 3 weeks.
Very good.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Vanover.
if I may, and that is correct. I have spoke with Mr. Mapson regarding this, and I was on board with everything you said until the last thing you said. And I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm assuming you've discussed this with your clients. It is, and I'm going to ask you the question, in your professional opinion as a licensed design professional, the use of what's being called the multi-purpose room for transient stay, in your opinion, is an R1 transient use. Is that the assessment that you made? And that's what you're designing to?
I'm designing to that.
Okay.
Per your request to change the use, but it is a multi-use space, and it is a multi-use space. And also, where do you actually stop with the changing of use of a religious worship building that actually has a commercial kitchen in it? Does that become a restaurant? It has an educational wing. Does that become an educational wing? A B business, which also might be a component of a religious worship service. But by complying with these R1 requirements, we are protecting the occupants per the R1 code requirements.
So Mr. Chairman, Mr. Mapson,
yes,
I hear what you're saying. The code is very clear on multiple uses in a building, and when those uses become a change of use and when they do not. A commercial kitchen is not a restaurant. It's an accessory use to the church. That is allowed. The business portions of the church are accessory uses to the church. That is allowed. Residential stay is not an accessory use to the church. The code doesn't define it that way. So the argument of where do you stop and when do the code is very clear on that. So it's a matter of doing research. There's multiple sections in Chapter 7, multiple sections in the Chapter 3 on when mixed use buildings, Chapter 5, and when mixed use buildings and how they act. So it is not my request. It is the position of the building department that this is a requirement. If you're going to, and the code, as you are aware, as a design professional licensed in the state of Ohio, that the code requires you when you have mixed use buildings and separated or non-separated, that you design and classify them as the most restrictive use. Transient, sleeping quarters, and residential property is the most restrictive use in the building code, because you have people that are unfamiliar with their surroundings in a state that they cannot, they'll be sleeping, and therefore that's an increase in hazardous state. So that's where you stop. It's in the building code. It's identified in the building code as codified by the Ohio Administrative Code, as given power by the Ohio Revised Code. So it's all in there. We would not, and I don't understand the reluctance, but we would not object to anything that you can't partially change the space to the occupancy. If the expectation is to sleep people in this room, for transient or non-transient, but in this case it's transient, the code requires that you change the use and to the most restrictive use, which is that R1. So I will tell you that and this is a discussion that we've had as part of our conversation. You could, if you do all the upgrades and they meet the code requirements and do not change the use of that portion. The code allows you to change the use of a portion of a building and still maintain the balance of the building. But if you do that, then you will receive an adjudication order because it doesn't comply with the code. And we don't do plan reviews here in BBS. Once you receive that adjudication
Which
order,
I'm going to jump in. This is
then you,
because that's the line you just said, and we have no plan in front of anybody, and that's, I have my hand up holding, and
okay.
this was going down that road. What is before this board is the violation notice. So I went a little further than I wanted to, but Mr. Chairman, what is before this board is a violation notice that's been objected to for the change of use, that the testimony was then provided is that it is no longer occurring as of today. So we are asking that you uphold the notice as properly issued. There has been discussion, and I actually thought the plans would have been submitted before now, but they have not been. So that is separate and distinct from this violation notice, because it is not correcting anything, since the violation notice technically has been abated because it's no longer being used in that manner as it was when we cited. There was a statement, and perhaps Mr. Stockman, I heard it incorrectly, but I'm going to ask, there was a request or a statement to continue or to reuse this for this winter without the application having been made, and that's where my question comes in, because there is no current use of this, but it appears you are requesting to amend your appeal statement to use this in this manner. And I don't want to put words in your mouth, so I guess I'm asking, Mr. Chairman, to the appellant's counsel or the architect or somebody, is your request now to use this, continue to use this space without an application and having going through the process? Because I believe the city would object to that. We need to see what is presented so that it can go through that process that Mr. Vanover was talking about, that Mr. Vanover and his people would review, and then Fender would review for all those systems. So I'm seeking clarification, but I do want to circle back on what is actually before this board.
Mr. Chairman, we have Mr. Haggerty with his hand raised.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, and I have been sworn in. I am one of the lawyers who is volunteering to assist with this search, and I was not able to be in a meeting with Mr. Vanover that he described, and it sounds like there were some important things discussed. So I have a couple of questions and a suggestion based upon what I've heard today, and so here they are. If today's issue is whether the violation has been abated, for currently, yes, it has been abated. There is no transient overnight stay there now. So that's number one. Number two, if the issue is, if the church, if you are asking us if the church it wants to do this next winter, which is approaching, and would we proceed with the appropriate requirements to do that and speak with different members of the city, yes, we will do that. The issue of whether we can, whether the church can appropriately provide the services that it wants to provide to the homeless is something we are trying to figure out how to do it in a manner consistent with the city requirements and consistent with the mission of the church. If what we are being told today is the current violation is abated, and in order to proceed, we must consider an application, we understand that, and we are willing to work with that specific directions. Ms. Ashton, is that what you were suggesting to us?
But I'm making no suggestion because it's your client's appeal.
Yep.
I'm asking appellants to address what's before the board, and I'm seeking clarification as to what the parameters of this board's authority is, because the board won't hear or rule on things that's not before it. And
Yeah.
so if they had continued to use it as a homeless shelter throughout, up to through today, and are asking to continue to do it, that's one thing, because it's still in use. It's stopped being used that way. And the city's position has always been, you are adding a use. I'll defer to Mr. Vanover on the code sections. The city's position has always been, you have to make application, tell us what you're doing, how you're doing it. And you know, we rule on that. We adjudicate it, we approve it, we review it to code standards for both building and fire safety code requirements. And that has a process under state and local law that has not been done here. So that was what I was seeking clarification from appellant as to what are you asking of this board? Because your appeal statement is filed, and I understand, you know, COVID pandemic, but when it was filed back in January, it was very clearly stating of an objection to the notice, and then statement that, you know, you engaged an architect, you're going to make application under the previous hearing that was supposed to be, I think, mid-April of some time. Things changed, I get that, and then you made your objections and cited to your federal and constitutional issues. So the city has presented sufficient information to show that the violation was properly issued, which is our administrative burden to meet by preponderance of the evidence. We're asking the board to uphold this notice, and then it becomes a what's next ask of the board. So what we're asking, what I anticipate the city would ask of the board is uphold the notice, deny the objections in the appeal, remand it to the city. The opportunity and obligation to make application has always been on the appellant to do so and make the application according to your architect that's forthcoming in the next 2 weeks. The code requires us, I think, Tom, the code requires us, I think, within 30 days to adjudicate it, right? I mean, we have to do something, and we have that process in place, and that's what we do. So that's what it is we're at, is what next? And I believe the city's ask is, Mr. Chairman, is uphold, deny, remand, and then the appellant goes through that process. Am I right on that, Tom?
You are correct, Ms. Ashton.
I think we heard that it was proposed to use this as homeless shelter for this winter. Is that anywhere in this? No.
Well, Mr. Chairman, they've stopped using it, so they are they've abated what we cited last December by stopping using it.
Well, where do we go? So there's really the appellant can proceed on further work at his schedule as long as he doesn't violate the codes with his present use. Is that what we're hearing?
Mr. Chairman, we have Mr. Gallagher.
Good. Mr. Gallagher.
Yes, I think that's exactly what we're hearing. I think that we need to do just that, uphold the violation, deny and to remand this. And then if they want to proceed further through the with the city on any plans that they have for what they're planning on doing, they can go ahead and do that. Right now, I don't think that there's actually, I don't know that they're in a violation right at the moment. They're claiming they're not using it for an illegal use at the moment. So I would just say, hold the violation, deny, and remand. And then they can
Now, we're
proceed.
supposed to deny the objections that the appellant presented. Is that correct? That they're,
for now, yes.
Okay, a motion is in order to find that the violation notice was properly issued, that the, hello? We'll continue.
We can hear you.
Find that the violation notice was properly issued, that the violation condition has ceased, and that the proceedings that the appellant may proceed under the direction of the Department of Building and Housing as discussed. Motion so in order.
So moved.
Motion, Mr. Gallagher, second by Mr. Dank. Call the roll.
Discussion? This is Patty, discussion. Mr. Dank, just when you, for clarity, Mr. Dank, when you say they may proceed as discussed, do you mean as proceed as discussed as to what? To make application and go through the
Proceed
process?
with the suggestion.
Yes.
Proceed with the plan that they discussed, which is compliance with the code. Where are we going now?
And for clarity, the code requires an application and plan approval and a permit for a change of use.
Yes. And we will concur with the Department of Building and Housing that the change of use is a valid requirement and must be complied with. Motion so in order, and motion by Mr. Gallagher.
So moved.
Second by Mr. Dank. And Mr. Bradley has concurred.
Mr. Bradley? Mr. Bradley?
Yes,
Hey, could you respond?
Mr. Bradley. We saw him. There he is.
Mr. Gallagher?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Bradley. Your microphone is muted. Open your microphone. But he agreed. He assented.
On this one, though, I need him to say it, Mr. Chairman. I have to get him to say that. I know the noise.
Bradley, you're unmuted. Please cast your vote. Mr. Bradley?
Yes.
There he is.
There he is. And that is your vote? Are you voting yes? Yes.
Are you talking, Bradley?
He's voting. He voted yes. Is that?
Yeah.
All right. He's voted yes twice.
Okay.
I want to proceed now to the resolutions. Mr. Gallagher has a prior appointment also. Next item of business, approval of resolutions of the following A-20 dockets: 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29. Any additions or corrections for those? Are there or motion for approval as submitted?
So moved.
Motion, Mr. Gallagher. Mr. Bradley?
Mr. Bradley, please vote.
A second?
Yes. No, yes, we're voting for the, we're voting, you vote yes for the approval of the resolutions. You vote yes.
Mr. Bradley?
Yes.
Mr. Dank?
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher?
Yes.
Next item, approval of minutes of 16th, 2020. Any additions or corrections?
No.
Motion for approval as submitted.
So moved.
Motion, Mr. Gallagher. Second by Mr. Bradley.
Mr.
Bradley?
Bradley?
Mr. Bradley's having trouble with this.
Mr. Bradley, can you cast your vote, please?
I'll try him again.
Mr. Dank? Mr. Gallagher?
Yes.
I don't know. I can't get him either, Maurice.
Let me try again. Mr. Bradley, can you vote?
Yes, Joe.
Okay. Thank you. Any further official business?
No.
Meeting is adjourned.
Mr. Bradley,
We need a
yeah. So
Are you stopped?